Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today we will start a new topic from our course outline, and that is engineering cost concepts and cost estimating models. I have mentioned over here the chapter numbers of the prescribed books from where we will cover this topic. In today's class, we will cover the first part of the topic, and that is the cost concepts, and in the next class we will discuss the estimating models. Let's first discuss what is cost. Cost is an amount that has to be paid in order to get something. In production, a cost is the value of money that has been used to produce something or deliver a service. When we when we are producing something, we need to buy some material, we need to hire labor, we need to buy equipments, we need to buy machineries. The amount we spend on all these buying is known as cost. In business, cost is usually a monetary valuation of effort, material, resources, time, and utilities consumed, risk incurred, and opportunity foregone in production and delivery of good and service. Business has a wider scope than the production. Production is part of a business. In business, we have to do many other activities with production. So, in business, when we are performing all these activities, which are listed down here, we have to pay some amount, and that amount is known as cost. So, in short, we can say all expenses are cost, which we have to pay or which incurred during production or during business. In today's lecture, we have to discuss all the important concepts related to the cost. So we start with the cost object. What is cost object? Cost object is anything about which we are going to estimate or calculate cost. It could be a product, it could be a process, or it could be a service provided by a company. Whatever the object for which we are estimating or calculating cost is known as the cost object. Then further, if we go into the details of the cost, cost can be defined or can be classified on the basis of its behavior and on the basis of its traceability. If we are classifying the cost on the basis of the behavior, that means we consider all those costs which change when there is a change in an output level of an organization. And in cost traceability, we will consider all those classifications of the cost which use for the cause and effect relationship with product, process, customer, or other cost objects. Whenever we are classifying or defining cost on the basis of the cause and effect relationship, that means we are using the classifications of cost traceability, and whenever we are defining the cost on the basis of change in the output level, that means we are defining the cost on the basis of its behavior. In cost behavior, we have two main cost classification. One is the fixed cost and other one is the variable cost. Fixed cost further can be divided into two types of the cost. One is the recurring and other one is the non-recurring fixed cost. And when we are defining or classifying cost on the basis of its cause and effect relationship, that is on the basis of its traceability, then we can classify the cost as direct costs and indirect costs. Usually we call it directs and indirects, or indirects also called as overheads. Overheads is the most common word we use for the indirects. Now let's go into the detail of the definitions of all these cost classifications. Now first we have to define the fixed cost. Fixed cost is basically a setup cost. Setup cost is always an initial cost. Whenever you are going to start a business, you are going to develop a factory, you are going to develop a facility to provide services, you have to set up that facility, that factory, or that manufacturing unit. The cost which is involved in setting up that facility or factory or unit is known as the fixed cost. And whatever the cost involved in setting up the facility is independent of the output level. Why? Because once you develop the factory, you set up your facility, then you can change the output level according to your production plan, according to the demand of your product in the market. Every time when you change your production plan, you do not need to set up the whole facility again. You don't need to construct a whole factory again. Once you have construct your factory, you develop your facility, then within the capacity of that factory or facility, you can change the output level. The setup cost remains constant. So setup cost known as the fixed cost. This fixed cost may change when you change the capacity of your factory. For example, you want to double the capacity of your factory. Then you have to install new machineries, you have to construct a new structure. In that case, fixed cost will change. Otherwise, within the capacity, if you just change the output level, that means number of the units you are producing, the fixed cost will not change. There are further two classification of the fixed cost. One is the recurring fixed cost and other one is the non-recurring fixed cost. Let's start with the non-recurring fixed cost. Non-recurring fixed cost is the one-time fixed cost. That means non-repetitive. For example, plant construction cost. In very extreme condition, we have to construct another plant. Otherwise, once you construct a plant, you can easily change its capacity by installing new units on your machineries, and you can change easily the output level. You do not have to construct the whole plant again. That means the plant construction cost is the non-recurring cost, that is one-time cost you have to pay. Recurring cost is the repetitive fixed cost. Repetitive fixed cost means which you have to pay after a certain period of time repetitively. And the example of the recurring fixed cost is administrative level salaries. Now, why we are saying administrative level salaries are recurring fixed costs? Because administrative level salaries are independent of the output level. Even if your factory is shut down for the maintenance purpose, you are producing nothing, or even your factory is shut down in the present pandemic situation, you are producing nothing for last 3 months, then even then you have to pay salaries to your administrative level staff. You can't fire your managers. You can't fire your administrators. That is, you can't fire your security guards. You can't fire the gatekeepers of your factory. Even though during these months of the pandemic, your factory is shut down, but some level of the administrative staff, you need the salaries of those administrative staff is independent of the output level, and that is why the salaries of those administrative level staff is known as the recurring fixed costs. The second type of the cost is variable cost. Variable cost is entirely opposite of the fixed cost. Variable cost is something which directly depending on the output level. For example, raw material cost. How? If you are producing 10 units, then you have to consume raw material of the 10 units. The variable cost will based on the raw material of the 10 units. If you are producing 100 units, then you will consume raw material of the 100 units, and the variable cost will be based on the raw material of the 100 units. So variable cost is directly depending on the output level. If you increase the output level, that means number of the units you are producing, it increases. If you decrease the output level, the variable cost will also decrease. The third type of the cost we saw in the last slide is the direct cost. Direct cost is something which can trace at per unit level. For example, raw material cost. All those costs which can be directly traced at per unit level of your output is considered as the direct cost. For example, you are producing plastic chairs. The raw material used in a single plastic chair can easily traced out. You do not have to apply any mathematical operation to know how much plastic is required to produce a certain design of a chair, right? That means the plastic used in your product is direct cost. Anything which you cannot directly trace from your product would be considered as indirect cost or overheads. For example, supervisor cost. Same, let's take the same example of the producing plastic chairs. You are producing plastic chairs, and in a shift you produce 100 plastic chairs, and there is a supervisor who supervise that shift. Now, how much supervisor give supervision when single plastic chair is producing? You cannot trace it directly. What you can do, you can divide the total supervisor cost by the total output so that you can get the per unit supervision cost. By calculation or by mathematical operation, you can find out the per unit supervision cost, but you cannot trace the supervision per unit supervision cost from a single chair. So this is how we can distinguish between the direct cost and indirect cost or the overheads. Whatever the cost that can be traced at per unit level is known as the direct cost, and those costs which cannot be traced out at per unit level is known as the indirect cost. As we are belongs to the manufacturing industry, so let's discuss the cost types usually involved in the manufacturing industry. As we have already discussed the cost object, same as with the case of the manufacturing industry, even in the manufacturing industry, cost object is the definition of the cost object is same. That is, cost object would be anything for which you are going to estimate or calculate the cost. It could be a product you are producing, it could be a process you are using to produce a product, or it could be a service you are providing. In manufacturing industry, costs are classified on the basis of the manufacturing cost and non-manufacturing cost. Manufacturing cost has further three classification: direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overheads. Direct material is that material which becomes the part of your final product. For example, again, let's take the example of let's take the example that you are producing plastic chairs. Then plastic become the part of your final product. So plastic would be the direct material, and the cost of direct material would be considered as the manufacturing cost. The second classification of the manufacturing cost is the direct labor. Direct labor, also known as the touch labor, or you can say those workers or those labor which directly work with machine or on floor. Those workers are known as direct labor, who are actually converting raw material into the final product. And though the cost of the direct labor is considered as the direct labor cost, which is part of the manufacturing cost. The third element of the manufacturing cost is the manufacturing overheads. We have already discussed about the overheads. Overheads are those costs which cannot be traced at the per unit level. That means other than the directs, all costs are considered as the overheads. But here they have said manufacturing overheads. Manufacturing overheads are basically those overheads or those indirect costs which are necessary to run the manufacturing process smoothly, which are necessary to produce a complete product, but they are not part of the direct costs. So all those uh, types of the activities and their cost will comes under the heading of the manufacturing cost. We will discuss the list of the manufacturing cost in next slide. The second classification of the cost related to the manufacturing industry is the non-manufacturing cost. Non-manufacturing cost mainly includes administrative cost and selling and distribution cost. Non-manufacturing cost means those costs which are not directly related to the manufacturing process, but definitely these costs has to paid by the firm, but these costs are essential to run the company. That is why it includes the administrative and selling and distribution. We will further discuss the further classification of the administrative cost and the selling and distribution cost. Now, overheads are very important in manufacturing industry. If we look at the total cost, overheads take major part in the total cost. Even overheads are greater than the direct cost. That is why the study of the overheads are very important. We have two types of the overheads. One is the manufacturing overheads, which we have already discussed in the last slide. And the second is the non-manufacturing overheads, that is also mentioned in the last slide. And non-manufacturing overheads further have two classification, as we have already discussed. One is the administrative and other one is the selling and distribution. And selling and distribution has further classification: selling cost and the distribution cost. We have to discuss all these overheads in detail. These are this is basically a list of the manufacturing overheads. Manufacturing overheads means indirect cost. Indirect cost means which cannot be traced at the per unit level. Manufacturing overheads means those overheads which need to run the manufacturing process smoothly. It includes factory building rent. The factory in which manufacturing process or production process are taking place, the rent of that building is part of the manufacturing overhead. As if you won't pay rent timely, there is a possibility you can't run your manufacturing or production process smoothly. Secondly, factory electricity cost. Now see, they have specifically mentioned the factory electricity cost. That means the electricity involved in the machining, in the manufacturing, not that electricity which consumed by the administrative offices, specifically the electricity consumed by the factory. That means your production unit, your manufacturing unit, that would be the part of manufacturing overheads. Then we have indirect material. We have already discussed the direct material. Direct material is something which becomes the part of your product. Indirect material is that material which needs to run the manufacturing process but will not become the part of final product. For example, grease, oil, etc. We need these indirect materials to run the manufacturing process smoothly, but these will not become the part of our final product. Then we have another type of the manufacturing overheads, and that is the indirect labor. And in indirect labor, as we have already discussed about the supervisors, supervisors are necessary to run the manufacturing process, but supervisors are not directly involved in the manufacturing process. They just supervise the manufacturing process. That is why they are considered as the indirects or overheads, or you can say the storekeeper. These would be type of the indirect labor. Repair and maintenance of production machinery and equipments. Those machineries and equipments which are directly involved into the manufacturing process, the maintenance and repair of those machineries are also part of the manufacturing overheads. There could be other examples. This list would have more examples, but from these examples you can get the idea what type of the cost involves in the manufacturing overheads. Now let's move to the non-manufacturing overheads. We have discussed the classifications of the non-manufacturing overheads. Let's elaborate those classification. The first non-manufacturing overhead is the selling cost. Selling cost includes salaries of the sales staff and communication. These staff are necessary to supply product from facility or from factory to market. That is why they are considered as non-manufacturing. Then we have administrative and promotion, collection cost, sales administration, and etc. Anything which is related with the selling of a product comes under the selling cost and which comes under the non-manufacturing overhead. Further, we have in non-manufacturing, we have distribution cost. As we need to sell our product, similarly, we have to distribute our product. We need to have warehouses. We need to have transport our product from facility to warehouse, then warehouse to retailer. And for at the warehousing and at the transportation, we need some administrative staff. So all these comes under the distribution, and distribution comes under the non-manufacturing overhead. Again, distribution is not necessary to run the manufacturing process smoothly, but distribution is necessary to supply the product from facility to the market. The final type of the non-manufacturing overhead is administrative overheads. Administrative overheads include salaries of the office employees, office electricity costs. Remember, we include factory electricity cost in the manufacturing overheads, but the office electricity will comes under the non-manufacturing overhead. Repair and depreciation of the office assets. The machinery used in the offices like computers, printer, photostat machines, etc. These would comes under the administrative overheads and the legal expense. These are the administrative overheads, and administrative overheads comes under the non-manufacturing overheads. If we combine all the types so far we have discussed, we can get these three important formulas which we use in our calculation and estimation. The first and important thing is the manufacturing cost, which we always require to calculate. Manufacturing cost is equals to the direct material cost. We have already discussed the direct material cost. Direct labor cost, we have already discussed the direct labor cost, and manufacturing overheads. The sum of these three will become the manufacturing cost. Conversion cost. Conversion cost is basically the cost of converting a raw material into the final product. So conversion required direct labor and manufacturing overheads. We will not include direct material into the conversion cost because material is converting into the final product. So the cost of converting this material into the final cost is known as the conversion cost. And conversion cost is based on the labor which convert the material into the final product, and manufacturing overheads. That means that process which required for the conversion. And finally, there is another type of another formula which we usually use, that is the prime cost. Prime cost is the sum of the all directs, and we have two types of the directs: direct material and direct labor. So the sum of the direct material cost and the direct labor cost is known as the prime cost. So these are some very common formulas which we will use. Now let's move to the cost as a decision making tool. So far we have just defined different classifications of the cost. We have to come across at different time period of our manufacturing or production processes, or but cost can also be used to make a decisions. How? This is we will discuss under this heading. Now we have to define cost as a decision making tool. First, marginal cost. Marginal cost is the variable cost of one additional unit. We know what is the variable cost. Variable cost is the cost of the raw material. Variable cost is that cost which directly affected by the output level. If you increase the output level, variable cost increases. If you decrease the output level, variable cost decreases, because it is directly depending on the output level. And the example we have given for the variable cost is the material cost. Usually, all the direct costs come under the variable cost, and some of the indirect cost also comes under the variable cost. So marginal cost is the variable cost, means in directs and indirects both. So marginal cost is the variable cost of one additional unit. That means if we produce one additional unit, what would be the cost of that additional unit? What would be the unit cost of that additional unit, which considered as the marginal cost? And why we need to calculate the marginal cost? We need to calculate the marginal cost in order to decide whether an additional unit should be made or not. For example, there is an increase in the demand of your product in a market. What you have to do, you have to increase the supply. We have already discussed in the last class. In order to increase the supply, you have to increase the production of that product. Now, if you increase the production, definitely your cost of production also increases. By the marginal cost, you can get the idea that whether you should increase the production or not by comparing the additional production cost with change in the price of your product into the market. If change in the price is greater than the additional cost, then you can increase the production. But if change in the price of a product in the market is very nominal, and the additional cost of producing additional unit is very high, then you don't have to produce more units, and you don't have to increase the supply. So this is how we can use marginal cost to make a decision whether we should increase our production level or not. Second type of cost which we use as a decision making tool is known as standard cost or average cost. That is the cost per unit. As it is the average cost, so definitely it is the per unit cost. This is the cost per unit of output that established in advance of actual production. That means before even starting the production, whatever the unit cost you estimate is known as average cost or standard cost. And this will be used to estimate the operating performance. Standard cost or average cost can be used to estimate the performance of your operation, right? How? You have set the standard by calculating average cost on the basis of the estimated directs and indirects, right? Then you go into the actual production. After you go into the actual production, you get the actual cost. Now you can compare actual cost with the standard cost or average cost which you have already established even before starting the production. By comparing these two, you can estimate the performance of your operation. For example, your actual cost is greater than the average cost you set in the advance. What does it mean? It means you are not going according to your set standards. You have to control your cost. Now, next is the controllable cost. If actual cost is greater than the cost you have set in advance, that means the standard cost, it means what you have to do, you have to control the cost so that your actual cost reduces and it becomes equals to the standard cost or average cost which you have already set. So this is how this will use to check the performance of your production process. If actual cost is greater than the standard cost, then we move to the controllable cost. And controllable cost is basically the cost controlled by the management decisions. Cost, most usually variable cost can be controlled by the management decisions. Fixed costs cannot be controlled because, as we have already discussed, fixed cost is the setup cost, which is once you have paid, you cannot control it again. But variable cost is changes with the output level, and variable cost based on the raw material you are using, the workers you are hiring. So by optimizing the utilization of the raw material and by optimizing the utilization of the workers, you can control the variable cost. There could be another condition in which actual cost is equals to the standard cost. That means you are going according to your plan. So the performance of your operation is perfect. So this is how we can use the average cost. And in case actual cost is greater than the average cost, we move to the controllable cost. And then we apply management decisions to control the variable cost because fixed costs are not controllable. Then we have another decision making tool, that is the sunk cost. Sunk cost is that cost which already been incurred and that cannot be changed by any decision now or in future. For example, cost of failed advertisement campaign. You initiate an advertisement campaign, but that campaign ends at a failure. Then the cost you have paid or you have invested for that advertisement campaign cannot be recovered by any future decision or any future planning. That means the cost of that advertisement campaign would be sunk cost. Usually fixed costs are considered as the sunk cost. Variable cost somehow we can recover by the future decisions, as I have already tell you that variable cost is controllable. So we control variable cost to sunk, but fixed cost is not controllable. Once you have paid, you have paid. If you can't recover it, then that fixed cost will be sunk. So this is how we can define the sunk cost. Now, next is a special classification of the cost, and that is known as the quality cost. Quality cost can be defined as a cost that is incurred to avoid defaults before the products are shipped to the customers and to satisfy the customers by removing the faults if defaulted products have been shipped to the customer to secure the goodwill of the company. In simple terms, quality cost is the cost of producing non-defected products. The first part of the definition is saying quality cost is the cost of producing non-defected products. And second part of the definition saying quality cost is the cost of removing the defects in order to maintain the goodwill of a company. And there is or and option between these two parts of the definition. We can combine these two and we can separate these two also. If we separate these two, that means we focus more on producing non-defected products. If we are focused more on the non-defected products, then there is no requirement of the second part of the definition. But if we don't focus on producing non-defected products, then what we have to do, we have to focus on removing the defects. When we focus on removing the defects, then we have to include the second part of the definition also. So in short, quality cost is basically cost of producing non-defected products or slash and it is the cost of removing the defects from the product. Quality cost can be classified into two categories: cost of good quality or cost of poor quality. Cost of good quality further classify into prevention and appraisal cost, and cost of poor quality further classify into the internal failure and external failure cost. Now let's define all these classifications. Quality cost can be broken down into two broad classifications. As we have done, these are two broad classifications and four groups. These are the four groups. First classification of the quality cost includes prevention cost and appraisal cost. These are incurred in an effort to keep defective products from falling into the hands of the customer. That means prevention and appraisal cost based on all those activities by which we try to make non-defected products. This is the first classification of the quality cost, and it is known as the cost of good quality. Second classification of the quality cost is internal failure cost and external failure cost. These are incurred because defects are produced despite effort to prevent them. And this classification is known as cost of poor quality. If we produce a defective product, that means we are producing poor quality product. Now what we have to do, we have to remove the defects. So this would be the second classification of the quality cost. And total quality cost is sum of all two classifications and four groups: prevention cost and appraisal cost, internal failure cost and external failure cost. But important thing is these two groups are moving in opposite direction. If we focused on the prevention and appraisal cost, then there is very low chances of internal failure and external failure. Internal failure cost means defect identified within a facility. External failure cost means defect identified by the customer. Prevention cost means preventive actions we take to produce a non-defected products. Appraisal cost means we make the inspections to produce non-defected products. If we do all the inspection and we take all the preventive actions, there is no possibility of the internal failure and external failure. But in case our prevention and appraisal system is very weak, then there will be a higher internal failure cost and a higher external failure cost. So in short, these two groups are moved in opposite direction. It's impossible that prevention and appraisal cost higher as well as internal failure and external failure cost will also be higher. No, only one group cost will be higher, then other will be lower. These are some of the examples of the prevention cost. For example, these are examples of the prevention cost. For example, system development. We develop a system to produce a non-defected product. We introduce quality engineering in our facility, in our production, so that we can produce non-defected products. We train our quality personals. We develop quality circles and etc. We introduce quality improvement projects, right? So all these are basically actions we take to prevent the defects. These are the examples of the appraisal cost. We take all types of the inspections so that we can produce non-defected products. For example, test and inspection of incoming material, test and inspection of the in-process goods, final product testing, supplies used in the testing and inspection, etc. If we do all these inspections, then definitely there will be no defected product produced. These are the examples of the internal failure cost. Cost of scrap, cost of spoilage, rework, reinspection, retesting. These would be the examples of the internal failure. And these are the examples of the external failure. Cost of field servicing and handling complaint, warranty repairs and replacements, repairs and replacement beyond the warranty period, product recalls, and etc. This is the diagram of the quality cost. At this axis, we have a quality cost, and at this axis, we have a quality. Initially, here we have a poor quality, and then we have a exceptional quality. This is the curve of the failure cost. That means internal failure and external failure. This is the curve of the prevention and appraisal cost. When we are producing poor quality products, in that case, prevention and appraisal cost will be at its minimum, but failure cost will be at its maximum. If we are producing exceptionally high quality product, then failure cost would be at its minimum, but prevention and appraisal costs would be at its maximum. The sum of these two is quality cost, and the minimum point of the quality cost is the optimum quality cost. We have to maintain this point. We have to achieve this point. Why? Because if we move in this direction, then what will happen? Then that means we are producing less quality products, that means we are producing more defective products, and internal and external failure costs will be higher. If we move in this direction, what will happen? Our prevention and appraisal costs will be so high. What we have to do, we have to maintain the minimum quality cost at which we can get the optimum quality. Why this level is important? Because quality cost will become the part of the product cost. If we move in this direction, quality cost will increase and the product cost will also increases. If we move in this direction, quality cost increases, product cost increases. This is the second reason we need to maintain the minimum quality cost so that the product cost will not increase. In today's lecture, we have discussed about different classifications of the cost. We have discussed cost as decision-making tool. Then we discussed a special classification of the cost, that is the quality cost. We have done so much discussion on cost. We can say this is the cost lecture. We only discuss about cost and cost. Your homework will also based on a cost, and that is life cycle cost. Life cycle, if I give you a hint of a life cycle cost is basically includes all those cost classifications which we have just discussed. What you have to do, you have to study the life cycle cost. I have even mentioned the chapters from where you can find the life cycle cost. You have to cover all the phases of the life cycle cost. There are 4 phases of the life cycle cost. You have to cover all the phases and you have to cover the relevant diagrams. This is your homework. This is not your assignment. You don't have to submit anything about this. But homework means you have to cover this topic by yourself. But if you find any confusion or any problem in this topic or in your homework, you can ask during your live session, but you have to cover it by yourself. You have to cover all the phases and you have to cover its diagram. There is a possibility in future I will give you some assignment on this topic. Right now I'm just giving you the homework to cover this topic, but in future there is a possibility I will give you the assignment. So this is the end of our today's lecture, which is cost lecture. I must say we have discussed so many things about the cost. We will continue this topic in our next class. Thank you.